Hey, what's going on there, Whiskey Covers? And as always, a warm welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do something really creative and unique. I wasn't able to find a video like this on YouTube, so I really think that this is an awesome video for one of the first people to put this out on YouTube. We're asking the question, what whiskeys pair best with smoked brisket? I have a massive passion for whiskey, and I have a big passion for smoking meat too. I think the bourbon and whiskey community is a really great community, and so is the smoking meat community. So when I have friends and family over who like either of each, I like to bring everybody together and eat great food and drink great whiskey as well. So that's what we'll be doing. What we'll do, we'll take this video upstairs. I'll show you how to prep a brisket. I'll show you how to season a brisket. I'll show you how to smoke it on a pellet grill. I'll show you how to rest it, and I'll show you how to cut it as well. And then ultimately, we'll go through the best whiskeys to pair with smoking brisket. And a bit of a kudos as well, this whiskey idea, or this video idea actually came from my wife. I wanted to smoke a brisket this weekend, and she just asked randomly, what's the best whiskey to drink with brisket? So we're gonna find out. Run the video and let's go to the kitchen. So we're in the kitchen then, folks, and in front of me we have a 22-ounce prime beef brisket. So you don't have to use prime. I always tell people just use what you can afford to get. So most of my briskets, probably about 90%, are usually choice briskets. However, I was at Costco and they were doing the prime briskets for $4 a pound. I couldn't say no. And they had just put them all out as well, so I kind of had to pick of which one I wanted. And a lot of them had pretty decent shapes, but I just kind of fell in love with this shape here. The flat is a little bit flat, I guess, no pun intended here. But here looks pretty good. And then what is so great about this brisket is this point up here is massive, and that's where a lot of the flavor comes from. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim this guy down a little bit here. So I'm going to be using just a fillet knife, but use whatever you're comfortable with here. I'll take off some of this silver skin, I'll throw that away. But any fat or meat I'll cut off, I'll render down for beef tallow, or I might put them in like a baked beef brisket recipe. So first off, I kind of see in some kind of dry, kind of like aged aired brisket on here. So I want to try and cut some of that away. There's a little bit of fat back here. I want to trim some of this down. I'll just take this off. Usually I don't like to keep a little bit too thin of a flat on this side. I usually like to keep as thick as my thumb, but I just think that this brisket is so aerodynamic that would be perfect for this. So I'm just gonna get cut in here straight away. And like I said, I want to kind of take off some of the fat, but not so much. And with the point as well, you can trim away a lot of the fat from the point, but because it has so much fat inside the meat, it can stand up. But when it comes to the flat, you want to try to keep not as much fat as you can, probably about 1/4 of an inch. As you can see, it's a little bit big there. That's probably more like 1/2 inch. So we'll trim some of that away there. So I just want to try and trim off some of this oxidized meat on the side here, and you can just see that marbling as we're trimming away here. It's just beautiful. This prime brisket, like I said, was $4 a pound. I couldn't say no. I think it was just after Christmas, so that they were coming up with some really good offers there. I'm kind of happy with how that looks there. I'm just going to trim away a little bit more of this fat. We're going to flip it over as well to really get at this fat here, so I'm not going to be too worried about this. The main goal of trimming is trying to make it as aerodynamic as you can, so that you get like an even smoke throughout there. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I just love the marble in there. So next up, I want to try to take away some of this fat just on the top here. Big lump of fat. So most of the fat will render out, but some won't. But you also don't want to be left with like a fatty cut, especially if you're having guests over. And again, the goal is to try to make it as aerodynamic as you can here. And again, I'm just putting all these fat clippings in an aluminium pan that I have off to the side, so I can render them down to get that beef tallow. And I just cook with beef tallow on a regular basis. This stuff usually lasts me a couple of months, usually enough until I do my next brisket. So we have a really nice kind of aerodynamic curve here. I'm just going to take a little bit more off there as well. And then we're going to try and work on some of this kind of silver skin here. So silver skin doesn't render out, so you always want to try to take off as much as you can here. So I'm just going to cut underneath it, flip it back, and then just kind of flay against it, just like you're doing with any kind of meat as well. Just try to take as much of the silver skin off as you can on the fat without kind of taking away from this flat part of the meat here, because like I said, it gets a little bit thin over in this corner, so we don't want to make it any more thinner than we have to. So So I'm just going to work on this a little bit and then we'll come back. So I'm just working on the silver skin just at the flat part of the point here. And why I like to use this knife is you can get like a little bit of a bend in it. So you can really kind of just generate the bend that you need just to kind of scrape away this silver skin without taking away too much meat, which is the aim of the game. There's still a little bit on there as well, but you definitely want to try to reduce as much silver skin as you can because like I said, it doesn't go away during the cook like the rest of the fat here. So that's looking okay for me. These little bits I'm not going to be too fussed upon, that extra little fat, just to protect this part of the flat because it's really thin. So that's why I've left a lot of that there. I'm kind of happy with all this here. There's a ribbon of fat there, but it doesn't go too deep. So let's flip it upside down here. So what we have is we have a lot of meat up here, not too much fat. We have kind of like the tomahawk there, or the mohawk I should say. So I'm going to cut away some of this in here, just because this is just all fat. We're just going to try it. We're not going to be like some people like to keep this mohawk on. Off, sorry, I like to take it off. They'll just cut it off and make it as aerodynamic as you can. But I kind of like just to push it down because it makes for some really good burnt ends at the end of the cook. And like I said, with the point, we can really hold up really well during a cook. This is a lot of fat running through here, so I'm just gonna go work on this and then we'll come back on the video then. All right then folks, so we've trimmed off the back there. We brought this side down a little bit. And also while I was at the back, I decided that I did actually want to try round it out a little bit more because I was just a little bit uncomfortable with how thin this is. So as you can see, hopefully from the camera there, so it is a thumb thickness in meat protected by probably like a 1/4 inch there of fat, which is perfect. Really happy with the shape here. So there's a couple of schools of thought of where we go from here. So some folks like to use a binder, just to help the seasoning adhere to the brisket. And I'm in that school of thought as well, because not only do I think that it does a good job of binding the seasoning to the brisket, I really like that it kind of gives an extra little bit of kind of like the bark to the brisket there. So what I'm going to use today, I'm actually going to use the aioli Trader Joe's garlic mustard sauce. Even though that mustard, you can use hot sauce, you can use like pickled brine. Those flavors generally don't come through to the final product. You can't taste the hot sauce, you can't really taste the mustard. But with this, it does leave almost like a small amount of garlic left over, which can really help like, you know, sustain the bark there, and also gives that underlying garlic flavor. Not overpowering, but it does create like another kind of step of depth in the brisket. So what we'll do here, how I'm going to be smoking this brisket, I'll be smoking it fat side down. Like I said, I'll be doing it on the pellet grill, so I will be doing it on the Traeger here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to season the bottom first, because ultimately the top is going to be the presentation part, and you don't want it to lie on its back as we're doing the underneath here. And don't forget to get the sides as well there, folks. So the seasonings that I'm going to be using today, we're going to do this guy first. So this is just Lowry seasoning salt. I just put in the shaker just so it's a little bit easier. So we'll hit it with some Lowry seasoning salt, and then we also go a little bit of the Holy Gospel as well from Meat Church. And then what I really like to do is just finish it off with some ground black pepper. Then that really helps the bark kind of set in as well, and gives you like this really nice fluffy pepper style bark as well. So this is the kind of like messy part almost. So, you know, don't go easy. You know, the brisket's a big piece of meat here. It can take a lot of seasoning there. So make sure you get a lot of it covered here. So what I'll do is I'll just go over the top of it here. And you never want to rub the brisket seasoning in. You just want to kind of pat it in here. And make sure as well, after you've done kind of like the top, that you're hitting all the sides as well. Because I left a bit of a gap here, because I just like how these pieces of meat make really good burnt ends without cutting them off. But just make sure you're kind of getting the sides. And like I said, it might seem like a lot of seasoning, but briskets, they do a really great job at just taking all that seasoning, because ultimately it's all about that bite, right? So this is the fat side that I'm happy with here. We're going to hit it. We're not going to do much of the Holy Gospel, but we are going to hit it probably just mostly over the top here. And in this seasoning, it's similar to Lowry seasoning salt, but you just don't get anywhere near the same level of salt here. It's got a little bit more of kind of like the paprika smoked notes with this. Cool. Again, we're going to pat this in. And then we're going to use the coarse ground pepper. Definitely the best guy for the job, this is. Just as you can see, as the seasoning is going on, you can already imagine kind of what that bark is going to look like. I wish I had a better shaker for this, but this I'll have to do for now. So what I'll do is I'll finish off layering up these, and then we'll see the final finished product ready for smoking. So then that's all the pepper here, folks, and as you can see, what a beautiful bark this is probably going to set in. Of course, seasoning isn't only the thing to get a good bark. You can just season with salt and pepper and still get fantastic results there with that. But I'm using a combination of what works best for me. So what we'll do with this brisket, we're going to let it sit for an hour or two here, and then we're going to put it on the Traeger. So we'll come back to that there, and then you'll kind of see the beginning of the cooking process there too. It's been about 2 hours at this point, folks. Just coming back to the brisket here. It looks like everything has slowly started to set in. It's taken on this really nice red color, which might translate and it might become a little bit more kind of like a red mahogany color. I'm hoping we can get closer to black for the bark there as well. Really happy with the overall shape here. This is a little bit flappy back here, but again, you know, that's the point. It can hold up to a lot of stuff. These are my trimmings. Most of it is fat. There's a little bit of meat in there as well, kind of just from what I've been trimming away here. So it's probably not enough meat there for me to use it for like sausages or burgers or anything like that. So I'm probably just going to render it all for beef tallow. And then if there are any big chunks of beef, maybe I'll just cut them afterwards, and then we can put them into some baked beans there as well, like this guy here. It's almost like a small picanha cut, that is. But again, look at the marbling on there. It's, you know, it's fantastic, the marbling in there. All right then, folks, then we have the brisket in the Traeger right now. And as you can see, this is what I've done with the bricks. I've just put them right on the corners there, so it leaves the air able to circulate around the brisket here. I put the point of this end, because this is where I get most of the heat on the left here, and then the flat down here. The probes I'm using are these wireless meter probes. And I'm using these because this is going to be a nighttime cook. I'm going to be sleeping during this. I'm going to probably wake up in about 4 hours, then probably crank the heat up. But what I want to do is these temps record ambient temps, so if it goes over a set temp that I've set, you know, like if there's a fire or something, it'll set an alarm on my phone so I know exactly what's going on. I can come downstairs and I can treat it. So I have these all ready to set up, and we're just going to set it to 180 because I want to set it for 180. I want to leave it on there for about 4 hours at 180 because I wanted this as much smoke to get on there before that box sets. Then the overnight cook, folks, just make sure your pellet box is full and ready, because having an empty pellet box is a sure way to mess up a Traeger or any pellet grill. So during the cold starter, we had a little bit of smoke, but it wasn't too much smoke to be able to see. I tried to catch it on camera, but it wasn't that much. I'm not too worried about that. That's just something I was recommended before. I don't think it makes too much of a difference with the pellet smoker, but it definitely helps adds maybe a little bit more flavor to that. So we'll come back in about 4 hours, guys, and see what temperatures we're at then. So it's been about 4 to 5 hours at this point, folks. As you can see, it hasn't built up much of a bark right now. It's taken on like a really nice red color. If I push it, the fat is still, you know, not rendered out yet. What we're trying to do is we were trying to build up the smoke flavor, which I think is what we were able to achieve here. So at this point, we're just going to make sure all the wood pellets are looking good. And we're going to whack this guy up to 225. Usually, if this setting had 200, I'd probably put it for 200 for an hour or two, but we'll go straight to 225 and see what we can build up that bark. So we'll come back in a few hours and see what we're looking like then. So it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon now, so it's about 6 hours or so since we last checked in. As you can see, we managed to put on the brisket fat here, and it's rendering down really nicely there. I've been intermittently spraying this with some apple cider vinegar and water, just spritzing it about every half hour because we don't want the bark to dry out. But like I said earlier on, we definitely kind of have this like really nice red mahogany type look. And if you just see just the fat when I poke it, it just kind of sinks in. And that's exactly what we want. So the bark at this moment is set to where we need it to be. So at this point, we are going to be looking at wrapping. Not that it matters too much because the temperature on this so far, this one here in the point is sitting at around about 165, and then one in the flat down here is sitting at around about 170. The temperature doesn't matter too much. It's mainly how the bark looks and how the fat rendering is taking place. So we're going to get this inside, we're going to wrap it, and then we'll get it back on the grill here. Wrap this guy in butcher paper, and as you can see right now, it's nice and tightly wrapped. Also, as well, we did pour some beef tallow from over here. We poured some in the butcher's paper over in the kitchen as we wrap this up, which is why it has this glistening color. Reinserted the probes back into the point and the flat. So at this point, we're gonna let it ride out for a few hours here. I'm gonna be monitoring the temperature just so it doesn't go too crazy, but ultimately what we're looking for is just probe tenderness. So I'll come back here with an instant probe read thermometer, probe it a bunch of times all around, and we're just looking for it just to feel like butter. Yes, the temperature ideally will probably be around anywhere between 200 and 210 or 206. It'll kind of sit in that margin, but ultimately we want probe tenderness, and then we'll just rest it ready for eating later with the family. So we managed to get the brisket up to 204 degrees, but that's not what we were waiting for. We were waiting for probe tenderness, and as you can see here, it just goes in just like butter. There's a little resistance in the point of what you want in the flat, which is what you want, but on the point it just goes in just like butter. So what I'm going to do now is going to put the oven up to the lowest setting that it goes, which is 170 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to let it rest there, and then we're going to eat it in a few hours. I'll slice it up, and then you'll be able to see that on camera. And I also still have the tallow as well, so I'll put that in there. So far we have a decent amount, and this stuff is just the nectar of the gods. It's fantastic. So we'll get this in the oven. We'll get it just resting for a little while, and then we'll come back and have some great brisket. So at this point, we've rested the brisket for about 2 hours. I took an internal temperature reading. It's about 170, so right in line with what the oven was just sitting there. So we're just gonna kind of cut this open. I haven't seen what's inside there so far, so hopefully everything will look pretty good here. So as you can see, nice bark there as well, not too kind of dried out. Really nice jiggle to it as well. So we're going to use a bread knife. This is what I like to kind of chop the brisket in. So we're just going to go straight through the middle here between the flat and the point. This is the moment of truth. Yep. Let's see what we got going on here. And as you can see, a really nice smoke ring. And those juices are just flowing out here, so I'm not gonna push it too much, but they're just kind of going and doing their own thing. Let's kind of get some pieces cut, and then we'll get the brisket onto the tray. We'll take some photos, and then we'll take it back down to the Whiskey Cove. All right then, folks, so we have the brisket back in the cove, and I'm just so full because I've had so much of this brisket with some family. I was drinking a whiskey upstairs, and that whiskey was on this list, and it's gonna be bottle number 2. But we're gonna just dive straight in, and these are probably my top 5 whiskeys to have with some excellent smoked brisket. So number 1, we're gonna go for Old Forester 1920. So when I think of brisket, I think of this like really like spicy kind of like hickory oaked kind of note that I get a lot from brisket, because this brisket was smoked on oak and hickory. So I wanted something to complement those notes. And I think Old Forester would do a really great job of that, because you're gonna get the proof of the 1920. This is 57.5% alcohol, and it does still have some of those sweeter notes. You kind of get not so much the spicy from this, but the smoke and the oakier notes, and then the sweetness of this, and the proof helps cut through kind of some of those oilier notes with the brisket. It's pretty readily available, around $50 to $60. You should be able to pick that up, and I think this is just an excellent whiskey to kick things off with here. So next up on this list, and we're going to go from bourbons to ryes. And this was the whiskey I was drinking upstairs. I had it in my glass, and this is the High West Double Rye. This is one of the single barrel finishes. This is the maple syrup finish. So much like the Old Forester, I wanted something a little bit sweeter. So this also has some really nice spicy notes to cut through some of the oiliness and the sweetness that this whiskey offers up. Because yes, it is finished in maple syrup barrels, and it has the spice from that rye as well. And this is a difficult whiskey to find because it is a single barrel, and you just have to find plain luck to stumble across the maple barrels to finish the series. This one is insane. It's like being finished for 4 years and 4 months. So you do get a bit of that maple syrup, and not as much as you'd think, but still really nice underlying sweetness that complemented this brisket really well. So then next up on this list, and if you've been watching the channel a lot in the last month, and you've been watching the best whiskies of 2022, you would have seen this whiskey, because that is Sagamore Spirits Double Oaked. This is just a phenomenal whiskey. It says even on the label by the tasting panel, whoever those guys are, give it a 96 score out of 100. But the notes I get from this is like a pecan, sweet kind of honey nut drizzled on top of ice cream, some really nice kind of like warm caramel bread, and also you do get some subtle spice notes that come through from the rye, and that's why I think this whiskey is really great to pair with some smoked brisket. You get the sweetness much like the other two, and you get that spice note as well, and the kind of the nuttiness really goes quite far with it as well. So pick up a bottle of this if you can. I've seen them at Costco's a lot for around $50, but other than that, they're probably usually around $60. But I highly recommend this bottle. And if you haven't seen that video, go back and watch it. So then we have 2 more left here. And if you're someone, again, who watches this channel quite a lot, you'll know that I don't particularly, not that I don't think this whiskey is any good, but I just generally believe it's just not worth hunting for, and that is the Booker's series. So this specific one is the Booker's 2020-03. No specific Booker's is this bottle for this kind of slot. What I'm looking for is like a higher proof, spicier bourbon. We've done kind of like a higher proof, like some of the spicier ryes around 50% ABV. This comes in north of 60% alcohol. The ABV on this is 63.65. So what we're really getting with this is we're getting a spicier bourbon, a higher proof bourbon that just cuts through the oils with a smoked brisket and complements it really well. I don't really get any of like the peanut kind of profile that a lot of Jim Beam products do from this Booker's. Yes, it's an expensive bottle. You're probably if you can find Booker's, going to be paying around $100, $110. Seems to go up every year, but definitely a great bottle to pair with some smoked brisket. So that just leaves us with the last one. I'm trying to go through these quite fast because this whole process or the whole video, I've tried to kind of encapsulate what we've been doing from start to finish. So I know this probably quite time consuming. So the last bottle on this list, and the last bottle I recommend to pair with some smoked brisket, if you can find it, that it's going to be well at full proof. I just think this has some beautiful creme brulee, burnt caramel, kind of toasted oak and toasted wood. You don't get kind of like the smokiness or kind of like the bitterness that you might get from some smoked meats. You just get more like that sweet vanilla creme brulee note. And it is a wheater as well. So I wanted to do something a little bit different from like a bourbon, a finished rye, or like a double oak product. So that's why I went with a wheater. And look no further than the Weller Full Proof, because it's just the perfect whiskey to pair with some smoked brisket. If you can find it, recommended retail is around $60. If you can find it for that price, you're gonna buy it wherever happens. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, folks. I think you've seen a little bit of everything when it comes to the brisket making process. You've seen me kind of prep the brisket, you've seen me season it, you've seen me smoke it, you've seen me kind of rest it as well, and you've also seen me kind of slice it up and kind of what you can kind of to expect. And hopefully with this knowledge of kind of like how to make a good brisket and the whiskeys that pair really well with them, you can put on your own parties at home, have some good times with friends and families, and just drink some good whiskey. So as we say on this channel, as we drink through the world's whiskeys one glass at a time, cheers.